Hello, I am Jim Downs, the President and CEO of the Hockomock Area YMCA. And throughout the 50 years our YMCA has been operating, we would not be where we are today in 2022 without the tireless efforts of our volunteers. From policy and board volunteers to youth sports coaches, our YMCA is proud to have committed individuals and families that give their time, talent, and treasure to making our community and the YMCA the best it can be. The volunteers of the Hockomock Area YMCA are part of over 37,000 volunteers across the country and globe who help YMCAs operate. Volunteers have been and forever will be critical to our mission, and a little known fact is that the Hockomock Area YMCA would have ceased to exist without the financial support of the board and key volunteers in the 1970s by funding the staff salaries and building expenses when times were tight. I am proud today to introduce several of our legacy volunteers, including Garner Lestage, Mary Claremont, and Steve Clapp. Throughout the years, all three have served in leadership roles as volunteers, including chair of the board of directors, and have shaped this YMCA into what it is today. We hope you enjoy their perspective and encourage you to get involved as a Hockomock Area YMCA volunteer in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Our first question, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background. What community do you come from? Garner, we'll start with you.
I'm a native of North Attleboro. Spent most of my life here until I retired 6 years ago. I now live in Orleans, down in Cape Cod. I spent my career in a family business. We were jewelry manufacturers here in town, and had a nice career. I worked a little bit longer than I had planned to, but anyway, one of the gratifying things is I got involved with the YMCA.
Mary, how about you?
Hi, I'm Mary Claremont here, and I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. Went into the Army and served for 5 years in Germany, and then when I got out, I came to Massachusetts and landed in Franklin, Massachusetts. So first thing I did when I landed was take my kids to the Y and teach them how to swim, and that was the beginning of a really great relationship with the YMCA.
And Steve Clapp, how about you?
I grew up in Walpole, and when I got out of law school in 1970, I was hired by a small law firm in North Attleboro, Paul Armstrong and John Paulus. So I came to North Attleboro with my family in 1970. And I got involved with the Y a little while after that because John Paulus was quite instrumental in the North Attleboro Y.
Mary, you mentioned you brought your children to the YMCA. So one thing, bringing your children to the YMCA and being as involved as you have been since, how did that all come about?
Well, the first thing that really sparked my understanding of the YMCA beyond swim lessons was the Reach Out for Youth and Families breakfast. And I'll never forget attending that and just understanding the mission of the Y and that we were open to everyone, regardless of their ability to pay. And that really struck me because you could see the lives that it impacted up close and personal. And knowing what a difference that made to so many individuals in our community, it just broke my heart to see those stories, but then it warmed my heart to know that the Y was addressing those issues and making people's lives better.
Steve, how about you? How and when did you become involved with the Hockomock Y?
Well, as I said, John Paulus was on the board of the North Attleboro Y, and he said, you need to get involved in the community, and the YMCA would be a good place for that to start. They run an annual fundraising event to try to get money to pay to keep the lights on, and why don't you go over there and meet at the old GAR building across from the fire station. It's not there now. And talk to the people there about what you can do. And they had a whole list of businesses in North Attleboro for me to contact and ask for money. And it was arduous. And we made just about enough money to keep the lights on.
My, how things have changed. Garner, you mentioned how much you loved your involvement with the Y. How did that come about?
Well, I was here from day one for the Hockomock Y because I was serving on the board of the North Attleboro Y prior to that. And as a matter of fact, Steve's old boss, John Paulus, is the one who got me involved. But, you know, after a couple of years, we decided that regionalization was the way to go. So we found some prominent people in Mansfield, Foxborough, Franklin, Rentham, so forth, to join the board. And we became a regional YMCA. And I don't know quite how it happened because I was 30 years old, I think, and I became the first president of the Hockomock YMCA. That was what they called the chief volunteer officer in those days. I think the chief operating officer was called executive director, or sometimes the general secretary. Do you remember that, Steve? That was a pretty quaint name for it. But anyway, I've been here since day one of the Hockomock YMCA.
Steve, Garner talked about volunteers. You had the tough part of asking for money. Looking back as a volunteer, do you remember maybe your most rewarding moment?
Well, after 50-some years of volunteering, Garner was asking for money too in those days. Everyone was. But after 50 years, looking at what has happened to the YMCA is the most rewarding thing for me. I classify my involvement as a volunteer with the YMCA as one of the most rewarding things that I've done in my life. And apart from my family, I think being associated with this YMCA and seeing it grow from a crippled, broken down North Attleboro YMCA to a beautiful regional YMCA with facilities and four communities, it's just, and all the kids and people we serve, it's just a really gratifying thing.
Garner, how about you? Most rewarding?
I think I got to say the same thing Steve just did. We got off to a rocky start. We were asking for money. We were begging for money. We had people around town that were helping the YMCA, even though they weren't getting paid. I remember W.H. Riley's oil trucks kept coming up the hill, and they knew they weren't going to get paid for this delivery because they hadn't been paid for the last delivery. But still, they kept sending the trucks up the hill. But eventually, we got to the point where we hired really exceptional YMCA professional leadership. And that's what changed the whole direction of the organization.
Mary, you haven't been around as long as these two gentlemen, but what have you found most rewarding?
Well, once the breakfast happened where the light went on and I said, wow, this is really special. It's doing a lot more than I ever knew. Ed Hurley asked me, why don't you join the Capital Campaign with John LaRocca? And so John and I co-chaired the Capital Campaign for the Franklin branch, and we ended up naming it the Burnin Family Branch from the generosity of the Burnin family, and that was just an amazing experience to see the whole community come together and build this tiny little building into a beautiful branch, and now known as the Burnin branch, and service so many of the growing community, because back in the late 90s, Franklin was just booming with growth, and it was able to meet the needs of the community so fabulously, and it's still a big draw for that area. So it just was amazing to not only see the community come together to support the Y, but then the Y in turn support everyone in the community. So that was probably my most proud moment, was when that branch opened up.
Next question is kind of piggybacks on the last question. Garner, do you have any stories, maybe a specific experience you had as a volunteer that makes you especially proud to be associated with this YMCA?
Well, I think mostly it's been said by Steve and by me before, to, just thankful that the thing didn't die in its infancy, if you will. The good professional leadership really got us out of the woods. I mean, we got off to a rocky start. The fellow who was serving as the executive director on day one of the Hockomock Y, well, after a few months I fired him because the board didn't feel he was being quite honest with them. But then we went and found a guy named Bob Fay who really started us along towards stabilization here. And then, you know, the phenomenal leadership we've had for the last, 25, 35 years with Steve Clay and then Ed and now Jim. You know, just the fact that it survived the early days and is flourishing today.
Mary, how about you? Any specific stories that makes you proud that you're a part of this organization?
I think the 20-year legacy of the Integration Initiative, where Pete Brock really took that to the next level, and it was amazing to go to the TPC and see all these young adults who had grown up in the Integration Initiative program, and when they all came together, there were no differences. They were all just people having fun and enjoying a great game of golf. And to have that special opportunity available for the Integration Initiative really was just an amazing example of how integration is part of everything the Y does, and so inclusive. And having my sister, who was deaf, grow up and try to be integrated back in the 60s and 70s into programs, and constantly feeling like she was an outsider, to see how successful the Y had been at making inclusion work, it just was, to me it was like a miracle. And every day when I go to those events with the Integration Initiative, it's like a miracle in action.
Steve, any stories that stick out in your mind?
Yes. Before I became a member of the board, I was working for John Paulus, who was instrumental in the idea of a regional Y. And he said that my task was to change the name of the North Attleboro YMCA to the Hockomock YMCA. Hockomock is a regional name, and he thought that that would be something that would attract businessmen from other communities. And I said, well, how are you going to do that? You want money to build a facility in North Attleboro. You've got a broken down building on Elm Street, and you've got a great gift of land on Elmwood Street from a benefactor, but you want to put a building on that land, and there's not enough money in North Attleboro to do that. How are you going to do it? And he said, well, we're going to go to Foxborough, and we're going to go to Franklin and Rentham and Mansfield and Norton, and we're going to talk to those businessmen, and we're going to say, come on the board and support the North Attleboro facility. If you put your money in and build a facility in North Attleboro, we promise to build a facility in your community. And I heard that, and I thought, oh boy, what a salesman this guy is. And it happened. There was a YMCA in Franklin when my father was a boy, and that went out of business. And there were some older guys that were on the board, and there was nothing happening with the Y in Franklin. So John said, look, the next thing we want to do is do papers for merging the Franklin YMCA into the Hockomock YMCA. So if we do that, we can convince these guys to give us their endowment, which is $10,000, and that'll go toward our building. And so I drew up the papers, and he talked those guys into merging and putting the money in, and I thought, oh boy, are we going to be in trouble? And here we are with a beautiful facility in Franklin and a beautiful facility in Foxborough, and these promises that were made to the board of directors in those communities actually have come true, and it just makes me very happy to know that this was not a scam.
It's a good thing we didn't tell them when we were going to build it.
That's right.
Mary, not only are members of the board of directors volunteers, but incorporators and so on, but volunteers at every level. Why is it so important, and where would the Y be without volunteers?
Wow. Well, I feel like the opportunity to volunteer is a special one. And when you get invited in, and I think each one of us got invited in either through a work colleague or through the leadership of the Y, it's hard to say no when you can see what a difference it makes. And the staff works really, really hard, and you see that every day, but you know that they need support. It doesn't happen without the community. And so when there's an opportunity to volunteer, it really it allows people to see the other side of the Y, see how the leadership comes together to really respond to the community. Nothing could have been imagined like we have today unless we had the crisis of COVID. And the food insecurities program that has been built over the last 2 years, just incredible. And that's the leadership pivoting, responding to the community, and volunteers jumping in to distribute food, to donate food, and to make sure that people didn't go hungry. And that was just an amazing example of how the Y takes care of the community.
Steve, why are volunteers so vital to the Y?
These two people on my left have something in common. Garner was the first president of the Hockomock YMCA, and he was happy to give the reins to the next president. And Mary became our chairman of the board, which is the equivalent of what Garner was president. And Mary did a great job during her tenure. And one thing happened and another thing happened, and Mary had to be asked, or was asked, to serve a second term. So she had 2 terms. Well, the same sort of thing happened to Garner. He was on the search committee when we talked Steve Clay into coming to be our executive director, the head of the organization. And Steve said, my only condition is that you serve as president. And so Garner had to have 2 terms. So Garner and Mary are the 2 board members that have had 2 terms as president. And Mary has done a wonderful job, and it's just what she has done during her presidency was great. All the pictures you'd see of the Y, all the events, there's Mary and all the other people every time. You know, she was everywhere. So she really brought good people to the board, which is wonderful.
Garner, same question. Why are volunteers so important?
Well, the connection to the community. The YMCA professionals are always very good at shining lights on volunteers. But here again, I'd say that for a successful Y, you have to have good professional leadership to make effective use of the volunteers. And in that way, we've been very lucky here with the management has kept us volunteers from just going around in little circles trying to figure out what's the right thing to do. They give us the spiritual lead and the vision, and we work. There's no question of that.
Steve, looking back at the last 50 years, what significant changes or impact have you seen here at the Y through the work of volunteers and also the staff?
The number of volunteer hours are kept track of, and it's amazing to see the total number of volunteer hours. Not only do we have a board for the YMCA corporately, but we have a board of incorporators. We have boards of managers for the North Attleboro facility, and managers for the Franklin facility, and managers for the Foxborough facility. All these boards are putting in time, volunteering their time, working hard to do the work of the Y, to make it happen. And just seeing the enthusiasm that our board has, and all our boards have, is really heartening. It's great to see them getting behind what we're doing and seeing that the idea of serving the community is actually happening throughout our whole region.
Garner, how about you?
Same thing. As a volunteer, you like to maximize the value of your volunteer hours, if you will, and I don't know how you could do better than by working for the YMCA. It means so much to so many people.
Mary, you mentioned the integration initiative earlier. That certainly has made an impact on the community. Can you think of any others?
Oh my gosh. I think just a recent example, I was lucky enough to have my daughter work for summer camp, and she was asked to help run the Choose to Be Nice program. And every single day, I got a great story of how that program changed the lives of the kids in summer camp, teaching them about honesty, teaching them about respect, helping these shape the youth of our communities in ways that they couldn't get at school, and especially with COVID and them having been at home, summer camp was just an amazing opportunity for these kids to come back together and learn how to socialize and share and be good human beings. And so just so many examples. You know, I could probably go on for hours, but that's one that just recently came to mind, was that Choose to Be Nice program and how that's impacted the youth of our community.
Garner, we are sitting inside the gymnasium here in North Attleboro. I remember when there used to be bingo in this gymnasium to help raise funds. You're retired, you're living on the Cape. It's a beautiful spring day. It must be gorgeous down on the Cape.
It is.
Yet here you are volunteering to be a part of this program, this tribute to the YMCA.
I wouldn't miss it.
Why are you still involved?
I guess basically I couldn't help myself. Really, as Steve said earlier, the work is so gratifying. You know, volunteers, you know, we get busy with our families and our everyday life, making a living and so forth, and we have a certain number of hours we can give. Well, you want to make the best use of those hours you can, and there's no better place to do it than the YMCA.
Mary, I know how busy life of a parent is, especially a mom. Why are you still involved?
I was just talking to Jim about this week. I'm going to be just like Garner. I'll be retired somewhere and I'll still be involved. There's no better gift than giving back. And, you know, having grown up in a family that was, 8 kids, we had to share everything. And then going into the military, you were always told, don't volunteer for anything. Never volunteer. But that was for a whole different reason. But I always wanted to be there for others. And this gives you the opportunity to be there in so many different ways, whether it's through the Way to Change program and being involved in the 5Ks that were put on, whether it's the Healthy Living Initiative, whether it's the school, out-of-school programs that went on during COVID. There's just so many programs, and they're all designed around the health of the community, whether that's the spiritual health, the physical health, the mental health. Everything is there to support people's success, and that's why you can't step away. It's always a need, and there's always an opportunity.
Steve, you're still at the law firm. Paulus is gone, but Clapp is still there, still on Church Street. You live, what, an hour away, 45 minutes away? Why are you still involved?
I hate to see it not doing what it's been doing, and just being on the board and watching it do its work is just so gratifying. We've had a great run with Ed Hurley, and Ed has maximized opportunities to put good people on the board, and it's been great working with those people over the years. And Ed always had good insight and good direction, and it was just something I didn't want to lose touch with.
Mary, we look back at the past. Let's take a look into the crystal ball. What excites you about the future of the Hockomock Area YMCA?
Wow. It's amazing to see where it's come from, and I know that the future is tremendously bright because we're refreshing the strategic plan. We're looking at expanding into new communities and serving even more of the local 15 communities that we're in now. So it's going to be exciting to see that growth, because with that growth means more people will be served. So it's just very exciting because of the way the Y is always responding and has so many connections and ways to make sure that the needs are met. So it's just truly inspirational to be part of that strategic plan and know that there's going to be so many more people that are going to benefit from the Y just by virtue of what we do every day.
Steve, what excites you about the future?
If we can keep on going the way we've been going, there's a lot of good we can do. Just to see what happened during the pandemic, we thought our business was over. Who's going to come to the YMCA for all the programs that we normally have? What's going to happen to our organization? Well, all of a sudden the staff stopped running programs and started giving out food and talking to people to give us money so that we could feed people. And these are people that never had a problem with food in their whole life, and they're out of work and they need groceries. And we just turned our organization, or Ed turned the organization into a different sort of community effort than what we'd had. And if we could do that in a month for a couple of years, there's nothing that'll stop us from really serving the needs of the community. And I was just so happy to see all the people that got helped by the YMCA over the last couple of years. And we have a great financial team, and they made sure that we applied for grants and we got government funding that was available to do our work. And we've thrived and been able to do all this good at the same time. And we just need to step into what we were doing before the pandemic and continue on with our programming and good work at the same time. And I see that as the future.
Garner, it sounds like the Hockomock Area YMCA will continue to evolve into the future. What are some of the things you see?
I'm sure it will evolve, and I think sadly our society hasn't experienced all the problems yet that it's going to have, but whatever problems come up, I'm confident that the YMCA will figure out a way to meet them and just bring service to the community.
Final question. I'm going to ask the three of you to put on your recruiting hats right now. Steve, I'll begin with you. Why should others get involved as a volunteer here at the Hockomock Area YMCA?
They should get involved because they could help shape what the YMCA does for the people that they want to see benefited. And we believe in diversity and inclusion, and we need to recruit people who will make our management and our boards more diverse and more inclusive. And with Mary's help, we're stepping in that direction, and we're working hard to do that. And we need people in the community that they may not have a lot of money, but they have a lot of ideas. And if they can come and help us do our work and shape what we're doing, that's what really will make us succeed.
Garner, what would you say to someone who's thinking about volunteering?
I think I touched on this a few minutes ago, Peter. Giving service to other people makes people feel good about themselves. And if you want to make effective use of your volunteer time, I think doing it through the YMCA is probably the most appealing way out there. I mean, you look around your community, you can take all the youth groups, all the senior groups, community groups. You know, you put it all together, and I'm not sure it equals one YMCA. So if you want to maximize your volunteer time, the YMCA is the way to do it.
Mary, you get the final word.
I love to have the final word. I would say to anyone who's thinking about how do I give back to my community, charity starts at home. If you aren't invested in the town and the community that you live in, then you're missing an opportunity. And it's an opportunity to really build your own legacy. As Garner said, when you give, there's no greater reward than giving. And this is the best way to give, is to be part of a community like the YMCA, because there's something for everyone. And regardless of people's ability to pay, there are no boundaries here. The YMCA will cross over any obstacle to make sure that people are taken care of, and you can be a part of that, and that's really special. It's a great opportunity that people have an opportunity to do no matter who you are.
Mary, Steve, Garner, thank you for volunteering your time this afternoon.